It's your host, Emily Matheson, and welcome to New York Transplants, the podcast. On this podcast, I connect with other transplants to better understand how can we find human connection and build community in this concrete jungle. As a mental health expert, I am always looking for new ideas and tools to support my sense of belonging and well-being. That's why I am leaning on my guests and asking for their advice on how I and you can nurture our New York roots. So what are you waiting for? Come and get rooted with us. Nina Badzin, welcome to New York Transplants.
I am so thrilled to be here and to remember my transplant days. I am also a transplant, but to Minneapolis.
Tell me, where were you originally from?
So I'm from Chicago in the suburbs, so not the city, but Highland Park. And we do in Minneapolis, those of us who are not from here, call ourselves transplants. So it's a pretty common word, but because I now have been here over 20 years, really most of my adult life, I was 23 when I moved here. I haven't used that word in a while, but it is a common word. So I was so excited about your podcast and when you reached out, because I was like, yes, I have a lot to share about transplant life.
And also it speaks to the fact that distance doesn't define transplant. You could move interstate, that could be, only 200 miles away from each other, or you could move to a different hemisphere. And a lot of the experiences are similar because you are uprooting and putting yourself into a completely different or new environment and leaving something behind. So I think that that's an important reminder. It doesn't matter about the distance. It's about the experience that a transplant has.
Absolutely.
I really want to start off by talking about Dear Nina, because you are the host of an incredibly successful podcast yourself. You've been writing about the topic about friendship since 2014. And in 2021, you decided to launch Dear Nina, Conversations about Friendship. Tell me a bit more about that startup process and what was your why for starting the podcast?
Well, the why for the podcast it's really more about the why about friendship, because I only did the podcast because that is where the medium had moved, right? So people just weren't reading as much and they were listening so much. I think I would have been happy to leave it as a written column because it is, as a podcaster, it's a lot simpler and easier to edit, and you can, especially if you're running it yourself, you can change your mind on something you wrote and quickly switch it on the website. There's no quickly switching anything in audio. But what are you going to do if you want to reach people and you care about your message? At this point, podcasting is where it's at, and I'm sure one day it will change again. But the why on friendship is, I think that friendship is, and it's not just I think, there are studies to prove this, it is so important for your health and your happiness, mental and physical health. However, I've seen in my experience, I think people make it much harder than it needs to be. I think we can simplify it with many different methods. Well, and some of this applies even to being a transplant. It's some of these same skills. And I don't know why I feel that I have the message to give, but people seem to listen to it. I have a way, I think, of delivering it, both in writing and in talking about it, that makes it feel doable. And I end every episode by saying, when our friendships are going well, we are happier all around. And I truly, deeply believe that. And I believe the opposite is true, too. Anyone who's been in any friendship strife, you feel like you don't have friends, or you feel like you are having issues with the friends you have, people are criticizing you, or you don't feel you fit in, all that. Everything else could be going great in your life. You could have, good health. You could have a good job, close relationships with your family, maybe even a wonderful significant other. You're beefing with a friend, you're miserable. That's just how you're perseverating on it. So I believe that I have a way of helping people make it better, and therefore their lives will be happier.
And it speaks to the success that, you're going to the fourth year now of the podcast, over 100 episodes. I was binge listening for the last couple of weeks just to your wisdom that you were sharing. And I think it's really important, before we actually discuss, friends and friendship, that we define what you mean when we're talking about friendship. Can you tell us how you define that concept?
Yeah. I think my opinion of friendship might differ than others, and it's why I think friendship can be easier. I don't think friendship is always perfectly mutual. And I think people are
Mm-hmm.
looking for mutuality, or they're looking at the definition of mutual differently than I look at it. So I
Mm-hmm.
think friendship is a relationship that you choose, first of all. Okay. That's just a fact. And it's the best thing about friendship is that you get to
Mm-hmm.
choose it, and you get to choose more than one. You don't have to have
Mm-hmm.
just one person who fits all your needs. And so a friendship is a relationship that makes you feel good, but you also make the other person feel good. It's not just about you.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing we didn't mention is that I receive a lot of anonymous letters. That's what I've been doing since 2014, is writing an advice column about friendship. And the letters are truly anonymous. So people write all kinds of things. And a lot of it is about for me, what this person didn't do for me, what I want for me.
Yes.
And I see very little self-reflection on, perhaps what kind of friend you are or can be. So what a friendship is something that feels good to you and that you do to feel good for other people, and it's not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily always equal at the same time. Sometimes you do
Mm.
more and sometimes you do less, and it equals out over time, hopefully. That to me is a good
Yes.
friendship.
People fall into the trap of taking tabs on contributions to a friendship. So I've done this, and it's not necessarily been reciprocated. And I can see how people might not allow for that time for it to even out because they cut the friendship too short or too quickly to allow the other, person in that relationship to show up for them.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. It's a huge theme in my podcast and in the letters I get, is this search people have for proof of friendship, I think.
Mm,
And people have very full lives. Like I said, we get to choose our friendships, and we have
yes.
all other kind of categories in our lives to attend to.
Mm,
So let's say you're in a situation where your health is an issue. I even have a tiny thing right now. It's so silly. Thank God I am in good health, but like I tweaked my back a little bit the other day.
mm-hmm.
Now, added to my schedule are unexpected physical therapy visits, things that take time. I have to drive there. I have the
Yes.
appointment. I have to like switch up everything. And it's not a crisis, thank God, but it is an unexpected
Mm-hmm.
irritation. And that's just like one tiny thing that people might not know about. So I might have to cancel a thing. I might not reach out as
Yes.
much to make plans because you know what? I don't have any openings in my calendar in the next 3 weeks
Mm-hmm.
because they're full of physical therapy appointments.
Mm,
But it's not personal. If
yes.
I don't reach out to someone, it's not personal. People take things personally that
Mm,
aren't personal and give each other very little room to
mm-hmm.
have any kind of other excuse other than, oh, this person doesn't like me as much as I like them. Most people aren't thinking
Mm-hmm.
about anybody else to that level,
So
but we
true.
we think they are.
Yes, and also another lens for that is the people pleaser element. I think as someone who tries and shows up for their close relationships 100% of the time, and when you are going through life transitions or just your busy day-to-day scheduling, I know that I can really get hard on myself or berate myself for not keeping up as frequently as I would like to. And then you just add time zones into the situation, and you know, that guilt just is magnified. And I think something that a tactic or a strategy I've started using is just being really honest with my friends of like, forgive me if I haven't, reached out recently, or just trying to be more transparent about why it is rather than just trying to keep up that communication as if nothing else was happening. But it can feel a little uncomfortable when you're trying to be vulnerable and transparent on a number of different levels.
I think that's really wise to do that. It'd be nice, actually, if more people would communicate when
Mm,
something has changed. It doesn't happen often. And I think a lot of times people, like I said, feel a sense that something has changed, and they think it's about them. And by the way, sometimes
mm,
it is, and that's a whole other thing. But oftentimes it's life circumstances, and that's what I
mm-hmm.
mean when I say we make friendship sometimes harder than it needs to be, because now
Yeah.
you've told yourself a story
Yep.
about your friend and why they're not texting back as quickly as they used to, and um, I don't know how active you are on TikTok, but even though I'm much older than you, am quite active on TikTok. And once you get into an algorithm on TikTok, and who knows, maybe by the time this airs, TikTok won't even be around anymore, but it spits you into an algorithm. It really gets to know you. It knows that I like friendship content. So that's what I see. I see friendship content and Broadway content. And that's
Great combination.
Nice.
Yes.
And the friendship stuff is usually just regular people basically complaining about their friends. And they're on there saying, you know, maybe not a specific friend, but people use the terminology red flag a lot. And so they'll get on there and they'll be like, oh, red flag. And it's usually something along all these lines that we're talking about. You know, if your friend doesn't, you know, reach out to make plans as much as you do, they're not a good friend. And I just, sometimes if I have the courage and I don't mind being yelled at, I'll get there in the comments and be like, that's really short-sighted. I mean, people have a lot of things going on. We take turns carrying the load. That's how it goes.
Absolutely. Giving both ourselves and the friendship, you know, grace to have those periods. And, you know, I'm sure if it's a reoccurring pattern, having that honest, open conversation with that friend, if it means that much to you that it feels lopsided. But again, I think sometimes we can fall into these unhelpful patterns of complaining about the thing rather than addressing it.
Yes.
And, you know, that is only recipe for resentment and a inauthentic friendship, if you know, in my opinion, because you're not truly, you know, communicating your needs from what you want in this dynamic. And sometimes those conversations, although hard, can really open up the relationship into a completely new chapter.
Oh, that's so beautifully said. I just want to say that. It's exactly right.
So for many transplants, we're trying to maintain long distance friendships while also trying to make new friends in our new city or country. I have found this dual position to probably be the toughest of my transplant experiences, because making new friends in adulthood is neither easy nor quick, especially, you know, in a transient city like New York. And in the process, I've caught myself unfairly comparing my new budding friendships to the seasoned ones I have back in Australia or back in the UK. What advice would you give to transplants who are balancing this duality between, you know, nurturing those long distance relationships with old friends whilst also trying to develop new connections in their current city?
That's an issue. And one thing I actually feel that I was lucky on a bit, because I had the same issue when I moved to Minneapolis, but social media was not what it is. So I moved in 2000. So, I mean, that was like beginnings of Facebook.
Yep.
But none of the other stuff. And we didn't even really have, you know, really good smartphones. I mean, we had like Blackberries. So you used it to text and whatnot, but you had to really deal with your present life a little more. And keeping up with your long distance friends was something you did inside your house, your apartment, on a phone call. And it wasn't something that you could do all day long and sort of avoid having to deal with your new local life. So I actually think it's an extra challenge for somebody who's moving now or in the past 10 years or so, because it really is easy just to stay connected to your old friends, because those are the friends who really know you. But I would like to suggest that people have a mindset shift, which is, wow, what an opportunity. What an opportunity to not be stuck as the person that the 5th grade friends knew, and the 8th grade friends, and the high school friends, and the college friends, and even the friends you might have had in your first job. Like, you get a chance to try out a new, more seasoned version of yourself, while also having the blessing of having people in your life who actually really do know your parents and know your earlier version of yourself. So I would try, it's a self-talk kind of thing of saying, how lucky am I that I have people who I know I actually can really count on, because I'm not brand new to the world. So if I have an actual issue, no matter where I am in the world, I have these 3, 4, 2, 1, doesn't matter how many people I can call, and they will answer the phone, or I can text them. That's another thing people yell at me about on TikTok, because I really still believe in phone calls, and I don't think you need to make an appointment to have a phone call. I think that's what voicemail's for. Like, if you can't answer the phone, Then you won't answer the phone. But anyway, I still talk to friends on the phone, long distance and local.
Yes.
But I think, yes, you could, if you had to, text your long distance friend and say, I'm having a horrific day, or I really need to go talk about this issue with you, and I trust you the most. And you'll make a time, and you are so lucky you have that person.
Yep.
Even though you might not have that person locally yet. And to keep the word yet in your vocabulary. Look, I don't have those relationships yet. But sometimes our old friends hold us back in certain ways. They know parts of us that we are trying to leave sometimes. And you keep getting reeled back into that version of yourself because that's who you are. We do bring out different parts of ourselves with different people. Yeah. So these new friends, while they are very shallow, such a negative word. I would use the word casual, actually, as I'm thinking. Those relationships might be really casual right now. You're not getting into the deepest, darkest things. It's such an opportunity to be sort of a little different. Maybe at home, home being wherever, you grew up, perhaps. Maybe you weren't the funny one. Maybe you want to try out, like, you're a little funnier than people thought. You know, your high school friend didn't realize how funny you were because they were the funny one. And now you're in a new town. It's like, no, maybe you are the funny one. And somebody new doesn't know that you weren't the funny one.
Yes, I love that reframe. And I'm going to add it because I just recall a conversation I had with another transplant just a few weeks ago. And they were talking about going home, and they hadn't for probably, I think it was a couple of years. And they were speaking about this difficulty, like, of almost feeling like they had to shrink themselves when they went back to their hometown because they had such expansive experiences here in New York, and there's almost a little bit of embarrassment or shame because of the, richness that comes with this city in terms of the people you get to meet, the opportunities that you get to have by virtue of just stepping out of your front door. And they felt like they had to shrink themselves because they weren't fitting into the same, kind of box that their hometown friends were talking about. And that's a really unique experience as well in terms of navigating the growth and the different, not to say one is better or, richer. It's just that they are different trajectories that friendships have, that people have taken, in their life. And that's a difficult and I think a unique experience for a lot of transplants.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that you would have to tone it down a little when you go, when people go home. By the way, I still call Chicago home too, but I don't think of it as home. I think of Minneapolis as home, but whenever I'm going to visit my mom or my sister, I do refer to it as, I'm going home. So it's sort of an interesting dynamic.
Yes, I have been grappling with this concept for many years, and I now like to think both Australia and New York as home rather than trying to decide, because I think, my heart is in both. I have my parents still in Australia, some very dear friends and family, and then I have Dan and my growing, community out here. So I feel like it's unfair to have to choose. And yeah, I know a lot of people have their various versions of what home is, and that's okay for it to be unique to each person. Another concern that I've heard from a lot of transplants that I would love your opinion on is navigating friendship groups, especially when you're the only new person. It can be really challenging to kind of step into a space where you don't have the same shared history or experiences as everyone else. So, I think for my current age group, I'm stepping into a lot of friendship groups where these people have gone to college with each other, which is a shared history of 10 plus years. And, I've really used this time as an opportunity to kind of observe my own thoughts and emotions when I enter those specific situations. And I've noticed that it's a prime time for the spotlight effect for me to kind of, start to think that I don't belong, or that, I'm the odd one out relative to everyone else. And I think that self-doubt can make me feel really uncomfortable and make it really hard to feel authentic and truly connect with people. So I would love your thoughts and kind of advice on how to navigate being the new person in a social circle and in a friendship group, and how to kind of, tackle some of those or reframe some of those unhelpful thoughts and emotions.
Well, as somebody who's a brand new person in an established friend group is not crazy to think that they are the odd man out. And I would actually advise against trying to fit into a brand new or to an already established friend group. I really would. I know that's not the most popular answer. The best way to make deep connections with new friends is going to be with other people who have space in their lives for new friends. And someone in an established friend group is already really, not that interested. I mean, you have to be a real winning personality and and like really thick skin to deal with the fact. And there are people like that. I've seen it here too. I've seen it in Minneapolis where somebody comes in and enters into like an already established friend group. And I have thought to myself, like, wow, like kudos. That is hard to do in a town like this that is very not transient. So when I think about my friend group here, just to make it personal, because I guess I do have one. I'm 48 years old. I've been married a long, long time. So, my experience is more in the coupled off world at this point. So for people who are single, I still think this is applicable actually. In my friend group, at least one person out of every of the couple, in every case except one couple, are not from here. And that is not a coincidence. So I'm not from here, but my husband is. In the rest of this crew, most of the women aren't from here. And in some cases it's inverse where the husband's not from here. And anyway, we weren't all married when we all met, but it makes sense that the people I connected with the most were also not people who grew up in Minneapolis, who went to overnight camp with other people from Minneapolis. We were from elsewhere because we were open to having new friends. I learned that through trial and error because when I first moved here, I do think it's just who I happened to meet. It's not like I was trying to make friends with people who were already in a group. That's who I happened to meet. And it just became very clear pretty quickly. I would have recognized it more now, all these years into writing about friendship. At the time, I was not writing about friendship. And it's too bad because I would have had so many good notes to take. But it became pretty clear, like, they weren't that interested. And here's I think an important lesson for people. I was very bitter about it at the time. And I think I was bitter about it for years. And I would run into people like that in town and I would feel horrible about myself. Yeah. Even though they never said anything rude or anything, it was just more their lack of interest I took very personally. And now that I've been here 20 some years, I actually consider myself a very friendly person. I am always open to new friends. However, I have a very, very full social life living here. I've been here 24 years. So I don't want to have coffee with a brand new person twice a week, every week. I don't. Just like 24 years ago, the people who had already grown up here and had a lot of friends did not want to hang out with someone new all the time. I mean, it's work. It's work to be with someone new, whether you've already lived in this town or whether you're brand new. And so now that I've been on both sides, I long have let go of that bitterness, and I try to help other people fast forward letting go of that bitterness, because it doesn't help walking around the world with a chip on your shoulder. You're not going to make new friends that way. So I guess ultimately my advice is to avoid already established groups. If that's your only choice, I mean, it's never your only choice. But if some of them are being really nice and friendly, by all means, I'm not like, don't do it, because maybe that's a great place to start. But maybe just consider it a start. This is a great place to start so that I have something to do and I'm not bored. Yes. But I'm still also going to be actively joining activities and institutions and clubs that interest me, so that I might meet somebody that also is open, really open to a new friend.
I had never thought of the other person on the receiving end of welcoming a new person. That's the first time, and thank you for that, because again, it's taking the personal element out of it and thinking about compatibility. And maybe if you met someone 2 years before or 2 years later, their life circumstances might have mapped onto yours, more easily, and therefore there might have been greater, compatibility. But yeah, I hadn't thought about that in terms of it does take time and effort to invest into friendships. And the more you've been here, and I think about New York and some of the friendship groups I've been around, a lot of them have moved to New York with friends from their hometown or their college. So it was kind of just like picking up their friendship group and, implanting them into this city. And so, yeah, there might not have been capacity for you. It's not to say that, they disliked you or that you didn't bring anything to the table. It's a capacity thing. Yeah. And so thank you for that. I appreciate that perspective.
Other people, because a lot of times they don't even know you. So we as human beings just take any rejection very personally. It's hard not to. It hurts. It hurts your feelings. But I would much more hurt by the lifelong friend who decided not to be friends with you than someone you barely know. They don't really know you. They're not rejecting you. They're rejecting the idea of spreading themselves too thin. I mean, most people don't have time to see the friends they have. And so there's fear. I feel it myself. Sometimes I'll get an email still. This has been happening for 20 some years from someone who's like, oh, I know someone who's moving from Chicago. Even though I don't know them, they're like, oh, you moved from Chicago. Can you tell them where to live? Like, can you talk to them? And I always do it because I loved having that information when I moved. Yeah. But I sometimes have a little bit of fear. Like, I'm like happy to tell you what neighborhoods to look at. But in my head, I'm like, I don't want to open myself up too much to like another best friend. I just can't.
Yeah. No, I fully appreciate that reframe, and it is a capacity and compatibility. And I think the thing with rejection, when you are a transplant, it does feel magnified because your options are perhaps limited, and it can feel like you're grasping onto these connections. And so, yeah, I really, really appreciate that. I was listening to episode 107 of Dear Nina, and you made a really important point that I don't think we discuss enough when it comes to friendships and relationships more broadly. You talked about different types of relationships that we have throughout our lives. For example, roommates, neighbors, work colleagues, sister-in-laws or in-laws, and how these relationships sometimes get muddied with friendship-like expectations. And you emphasize that these relationships, so, your roommate, your neighbor, your in-laws, they're their own unique relationship, and it doesn't always have to involve friendship. Could you share more about that idea and why it's important for us to understand these kind of distinct roles and relationships that are a part of our lives?
Yes, I love that topic. It's different than friendship because friendship's a choice. Back to the kind of the definition of friendship being something you choose. You don't necessarily choose. I mean, you actually do not choose. Certainly your sister-in-law, your brother-in-law. You probably don't choose your neighbor. You likely choose your roommate in some cases, in some cases not. Like back in my day in college, you didn't choose your roommate. My kids do choose their roommates, which I think is a mistake because I think it muddies the friendship roommate line. And we'll get to that in a second. You choose your friends, which means you don't necessarily have to put up with things that you are going to have to put up with your sister-in-law and your brother-in-law and your neighbor, because you have to have peace in those relationships, whether you chose that relationship or not. So it's like a different social muscle and connection muscle I think you have to use with family and with, because it's not just your in-laws you don't choose, you also don't choose your siblings. I mean, that's in the same category. You can choose how close you want to be or not, but unless you are willing, and unfortunately, I think too many people today are willing to cut off family or make your living situation an absolute nightmare. If you're willing to do that, okay, then you don't need to follow this advice. But my advice is you have to let things go that you wouldn't let go in a friendship. I'm not saying you shouldn't be honest with someone if they're doing something like really hurtful that is fixable. I'll use like a really small example. Let's say you have a in-law who never really asks about your job. And you listen to them talk about their job a lot, and you want to talk about your job. I think you say to your sister-in-law and your brother-in-law, like, hey, whenever I bring up my job, you change the subject. Can we just talk about it for a minute? And they might not even realize they're doing it. And you have helped the relationship a little bit because you're not going to be out of family with this person. So let's just make it better than it was. Okay, let's say it still doesn't change, though. Because, by the way, I would give that same advice for a friend. You have a friend who never lets you talk about work, and they talk about work all the time, and it's a huge part of life you want to talk about. I would bring it up. I would say, oh, I just noticed that whenever I talk about my job, you change the subject. Can we spend a little time on it? And most decent people will say, oh, my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize I was doing that. Of course I want to hear about your job. And hopefully they'll change. Okay, if the friend doesn't change and it's really a problem, you'll probably spend less time with that person. If your sister-in-law doesn't change, yes, you can spend less time, but you're not going to, what, are you going to not go to the holidays? Because it's not the perfect, no, you have to manage to get along with people that are in that category. So I don't know if I'm making much sense, but.
Absolutely.
You let things go for the peace of the relationship. Sometimes the peace of the relationship, and that is your living situation, your family situation, has to supersede like how good you feel when you're with that person. A friend, you don't need to tolerate all that with a friend. You can choose your friends. That's how it's different to me.
And do you think that our modern understanding of community puts too much pressure on these relationships to feel and be close friendships?
Well, the roommate one's a really good example, like the college roommate. So, like I said, back in the day, you didn't choose your college roommate. And so there wasn't this expectation that you were going to be best friends. You were going to be someone who would live respectfully with this person in the room. So you had to figure out, whose shelves were whose and what time did you guys like to have the lights out? And could you cook food in that room or not? Did the food smell too much or not? Like, it's all about being considerate, but you don't necessarily have to be close. Now people choose their roommates. I mean, you don't have... you're not at this stage yet or I don't know, when you went to college, did you choose your roommate?
So we are slightly different back in Australia. A lot of us stay home while we're going through college. So we're living with our parents. It's a whole different experience to what we see here in the US and, in a lot of European countries.
Well, some American colleges still assign roommates, but for the most part, people get on Instagram and they get in these Facebook groups and things, and they're like, I'm going to be a freshman at such and such school, and I like this kind of music, and they look at pictures of each other, and they choose each other based on, could we be friends? But now you've added a big complication to the roommate relationship. Now, not only do you need to be considerate and you need to make sure your food doesn't smell and your socks don't smell and that your lights aren't on too late, you also have to include the person all the time, and you have to worry about their feelings about this and that. To me, those are two separate relationships, and it's a lot of pressure, like to use your word, to have to do all of that with one person. Like, how beautiful to have a roommate or a housemate or even a neighbor that you do favors for each other and you get along really well. But you don't necessarily have to tell your deepest, darkest and include them in every single social outing you have.
And you can have, I've heard so many stories of, people who have moved in with their friends, and it's, torn away at the friendship by becoming roommates because, they're a brilliant friend, and that's this assumption that, we can live together then. And that's not always the case. Has that been a theme that you've seen as you've been discussing this topic?
I do see roommate stuff come up a lot among friends, and it's kind of back to the consideration issue. So the person who might have been really fun to go out with, who always included you, who was a wonderful listener, never takes the garbage out. And that's everyday living peace issues. That now we're back to living in peace. It's really frustrating if you're the one who's always cleaning the dishes out of the sink, but your roommate just leaves them next to the sink. It's rude. And it doesn't even matter how good of a friend that person was before. Now you just see them as an inconsiderate person. It's very hard to get over that. Yeah. Again, like you mentioned in a different topic, direct conversation. I always say you start with that, but if nothing changes, now we have to make a different kind of change, which might be a different living situation, so you can go back to being friends.
I want to shift gears a little and talk about the role that friendships play in our sense of belonging and community building, what would you say the difference is between feeling part of a community and having a close friend or a close group of friends? And how do these dynamics overlap?
It really is an interesting, some of it's just wordplay, but they are different. So I think of a community, again, I'm going to have to use my own experience a bit, but I'm Jewish and, you know, we're pretty observant. My husband goes to synagogue every single Saturday morning. And he goes no matter who else is going to be there. I don't go as much. I like sleep in, I read, I do stuff at home, but I do go sometimes. And whether I'm there or not, like that community is happening. To me, community is happening no matter which people come. It's something you can count on. So he goes every single Saturday. Sometimes he eats lunch with this person. Sometimes he eats lunch with that person. It's kind of whoever shows up. And whoever shows up is welcome and wanted and included because the community is like bigger than any individual person. It's about something bigger than them. It's for all the people, not just for some of the people. There's a tradition in place. There's like a rituals and a belief system. And it's even a building. I mean, it's a place that you can go. It's an actual place where things are happening all week long. Things happen all week long there. He may only go on Saturday, but he's a really big part of the community. And I love this idea of like the community. It exists. It exists outside of my husband, even though he's a big part of it. A friend group, the individuals really matter more. And I feel like having both is a really healthy balance in life. It's really nice to have friends. I mean, you don't have to have a friend group. I think it's important to just have close friends. And when you're making new friends, transplants, you're not making a friend group and you're not making close friends. You're first of all just making friends. And to go in trying to make close friends is really, you'll get there, but you don't start there. You start with a friend. You start with an acquaintance, really, that might turn into a more casual friend, that might turn into a friend, that might turn into a close friend. And you collect enough of those and you start some things, maybe you have a friend group. But if you find some sort of community to be part of, like that is a thing that is happening and it feels vibrant and alive, even if you don't really know anybody. So that might be joining a class. I love to suggest people join something where everyone's a beginner. So it might be like learning to play something like mahjong or crochet or learning pickleball. Pickleball's all the rage. Pickleball's all the rage because so many people are learning it new. And so they can come in and be part of something new. And you might see a lot of the same characters all the time. You may never see each other outside of pickleball. That's more of a community. That's the pickleball community. That's not a group of friends. They're different. And both add to our lives a lot.
Yeah, I really like that. And one thing that I've been trying to do more is make the concept of community more tangible. I think it is a buzzword, especially on social media. We're hearing, you know, who's part of your community, your village, and it sounds so expansive and it sounds, you know, more abstract than it actually needs to be. And I think when I look back at my time in Australia, you know, really trying to get granular and tangible, it was, you know, it was the local post office who our family had been going to for many years and knowing the people who were taking care of our packages and would ask us, oh, where are you sending this today? Like even that's part of your community. And I think if you get more granular and more examples of what make up the community, it can make it feel like there are more opportunities to build that up. And to your point about having those physical spaces, that is what I think a lot of social media kind of concepts around community lack, and we place so much emphasis on that digital space. I definitely feel that there is a need for digital communities, but we're losing connection with those physical spaces for a number of different reasons. I was only recording a mini episode the other day for all the 5 things that I've learned from you know, my previous first 5 guests, and the disinvestment in third places is contributing to this loneliness epidemic, because people are losing confidence or they're losing access to these places where community congregates. And so kind of revisiting our definition of community and what that looks like and making it more tangible is so incredibly important. And that's why I love asking people, like, you know, what does community mean to you? Because sometimes people have no idea, and they have to kind of stop and go, oh, I hadn't really thought of that. So that's one of my last questions for you, Nina. What does community mean to you today? And what does your community look like sitting in that chair?
Wow, I feel I've worked really hard over many years to develop both as a participant and as a leader. So sometimes it's nice just to be the person who shows up, and sometimes I'm more of the leader type. Different kinds of communities, and I think it's best to not just rely on one. So as I mentioned, you know, I'm part of a fairly observant Jewish community. I'm part of a tennis community. I'm part of a mahjong community. Some of those have overlapped people, and those are different from like my friend group. I run writing groups in Minneapolis, and I've been doing that for about 10 years. And I do that with my friend Julie, and we do not intend for that to be something where the same people would keep signing up, but that is what has happened. So there's new people here and there, but that's its own community. That's like my writing community, and that's where I'm in more of a leadership place, but that's also physically happening at a physical place. And it's something we're doing, and some people do see each other outside of it, but sometimes no, you just see, that's the place you see the people. And I guess what I try to help other people with is seeing that it doesn't have to be just one way or just one thing, to try different things. Because in each of those examples I just gave, at one point it was brand new. It wasn't something I was totally comfortable with, either as a leader or as a participant. And you have to give to a community. You cannot just take. And I'd say that's my biggest thing. If you are not willing to give, and sometimes that means financial too. Like, not everything's free. Like, we're very used to this internet culture where you join 8,000 Facebook groups and they're all free. Not everything's free. Like, you get out what you put in, and even if it's a money's an issue, what you put in is time, and that's fine too. Showing up, time.
And being selective on where you put that investment, whether it is financial, whether it is time, because there are only so many hours in a day and so many days within a week, and a week within a month. And so being really intentional, I think, is so incredibly important. Nina, I could just chat to you for hours and seek your wise words and guidance. Where can people find you online, in person, and get more of your brilliant gems?
Oh, thank you. And I feel the same, and not just because of your beautiful accent, but you also have so much wisdom to share. I am on all the podcast apps as Dear Nina, Conversations About Friendship, and on Instagram and TikTok at Dear Nina Friendship. And I have a Substack newsletter, which, just to make life confusing, is just called Conversations About Friendship. And that's a very active newsletter that I love doing. And that's where all the anonymous letters live. So that's at Conversations About Friendship on Substack.
Nina Badzin, thank you so much for your wisdom, and thank you for helping me stay rooted here in New York.
Thank you, Emily.
And that's a wrap on this episode of New York Transplants. If you enjoyed this conversation, here's what you can do next. Share this episode with a friend who might need some support with their community building and transplant journey. Subscribe to New York Transplants on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube so you never miss an episode. You can also follow me on Instagram for short form content and Substack for deeper dives. And last but not least, you can leave a review to let me know what you think of this content. Until next time, stay rooted.